one day last spring, I drove to the small town of Vassalboro, Maine. I just pulled into the parking lot when a big guy in a big green pickup pulled up next to me.
Got your keys?
Got him.
Get in the truck.
I'm Matt Frasica, and this is The Briny, a podcast about how we're changing the sea and how the sea changes us. Vassalboro is a long way from the ocean. It's about 40 miles inland. But I went there to find out about a kind of fish that lives in the ocean and travels upstream to reproduce. Recently, those fish came back to their spawning grounds here for the first time in centuries. And this guy had a lot to do with it.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Matt, good morning. My name is Nate.
Nice to meet you.
Let's do this thing.
All right.
All right. Like any good story, we're going to start at the beginning and end up at the beginning.
Nate Gray works for Maine's Department of Marine Resources. We drove down the road a few minutes to a small pond surrounded by a park. There were kayaks on the bank and a picnic table. But we were there to look into the water.
Your fish?
In the still water of the pond, you could see dozens of small fish undulating slowly, swimming in place. These were the fish I came to find out about. They're called alewives.
Alewives are a member of the herring family, okay? These happen to be anadromous alewives.
And anadromous means they live sometimes in the ocean.
Okay, yeah, anadromous. Okay, so we're just gonna cover some basic definitions here. Anadromy covers that strategy, like the Atlantic salmon, live in the ocean, spawn in the fresh water. So the vast bulk of their lives, these alewives, will be spent in the ocean. They come in the fresh water to spawn. It's a great strategy to get out of the ocean where there's a lot of hungry mouths and come into the fresh water and spawn where there's fewer hungry mouths and smaller hungry mouths, okay? Everything eats these things, from whales, bald eagles, raccoons, minks, otters, cormorants, seals. Everything pounds on these things when they can get to them. And right now, it's a smorgasbord.
Alewives live along the eastern coast of North America, from Newfoundland to North Carolina. And these particular fish have come a long way from the ocean to get here, up a major river called the Kennebec.
We're about 75 miles from the mouth of the Kennebec as the fish swims. So they'll start pre-staging in the mouth of the river as early as March, okay, going in and out with the tidal flow, in and out, in and out. The water starts to warm up, in a little bit further, in a little bit further. Water warms up in a little bit further. They'll start fully committing to the river system in early April, in a little bit further with the tide. Okay, water starts warming up. You get a few nice warm days. Ooh, this is nice. It gets a little bit warmer. They go further up. Flows start coming down. You get to that right temperature and boom, they start stringing and headed upstream.
That's a couple months of swimming, 75 miles upstream with no food.
Nobody's interested in food. They want to get here, make kids, and get out.
After this adventure, the alewives will swim back downstream and do the whole thing again next spring. The eggs they leave behind will hatch in a matter of days, and the juveniles will stick around in the lake, eating plankton and growing big and strong. Then, in the fall, the young alewives travel downriver to the ocean. After 4 years of living in the ocean, they'll be mature adults, and they'll come back here to do what mature adults do and start the whole cycle over again. But, like a lot of fish species, alewife populations have been in decline, actually for centuries. To show me the reason, Nate brought me to another spot. We pulled off on a gravel road next to an old brick building that overlooked a rushing stream. This building used to be a woodworking mill going back 200 years.
They made everything here from sleighs, chairs, hammer handles, axe handles. If it was made out of wood, they could build it.
The water behind the dam powered the mill, using the energy of the pent-up stream to run its machinery. It's the same story in small towns all over New England.
They all have one thing in common. That. Water. They're all on water, every last one of them, because it was horsepower. That is one of the reasons that we saw the massive decline in this particular species, river herring, is because of all these dams.
A couple hundred years later, most of those dams aren't powering machinery anymore.
The vast bulk of dams in this state do one thing. They sit there.
Well, they do one other thing. They block the migration of river herring. So the first step in restoring the fish habitat is to take out the dams, or build a fish ladder so that they can swim around them. Of course, taking out dams, building fish ladders, requires working with another species, humans.
We spent a fair amount of time listening to people and trying to understand the personalities.
Landis Hudson is the executive director of Maine Rivers, a nonprofit focused on habitat restoration in the state. She and Nate started working together in Vassalboro about 15 years ago.
We had lots of meetings. We just had lots of meetings, and we would invite the local conservation commission, the land trust, the two towns, trying to figure out how to tell the story that we wanted to tell. And we wanted to make sure that we had as many local voices as we could bring in.
There were 6 old dams on this one small stream, and each one required negotiations with different landowners. So Landis and Nate had to be willing to compromise.
We couldn't really be perfectionists and say, we'll only do this if we can do it our way. We had to take each situation and say, what's truly the best we can do here? What is the most realistic thing we can do here? If we had dreamed up on our own how we wanted to do it, it probably never would have gotten done.
One of those landowners was Ray Breton.
I feel like I'm the luckiest guy. I have the prettiest property in this town.
Breton owns a giant red brick mill complex. They used to make woolen textiles here, and at one time, the mill was the biggest employer in the area. Breton also owns that park where Nate and I watched the Alewives together. That pond sits behind the dams on Breton's property. He wasn't opposed to restoring the alewife habitat, but he didn't want to lose his dams, because then he'd lose the pond.
And everybody's like, how come Ray gets to keep his dams and all the other ones got taken down? Well, I said, you'd get a whole town upset. This is the only place they have to go. You know, we have 4 lakes in this town. You can't swim in them. You can't do anything.
Because they're surrounded by private land.
Yeah, the town doesn't have anything. All they got is what I give them, and I share what I got.
So Maine Rivers and the state worked with Breton to come up with fish passages to bypass the dams. Now, bringing alewives back here wouldn't have been possible 25 years ago. That's because there were a couple of big industrial dams downstream from here that blocked fish from getting this far upriver. The first of those dams came down in 1999.
Maine makes some environmental history today. With the help of a backhoe, the Kennebec River is freed from the Edwards Hydroelectric Dam in Augusta. The river flows free, the dam soon will be no more.
It was a lot of headaches, a lot of frustration, a lot of work, but it essentially opened up the watershed and made it possible for the fish to move upstream to try to make their way to their historic spawning grounds.
Removing that dam allowed the fish to get upstream, but it also showed people that the ecosystem could bounce back.
Within hours of this dam being removed, the fish were making their way up the river. So it was a combination of the physical work, but also opening people's imaginations and saying, oh, just because the dam has been here for, a lot longer than 100 years doesn't mean that it belongs here forever. And it doesn't mean that a river that's essentially been obliterated cannot come back to life.
The good news is, according to Nate, once you get the dams out or give the fish a way to get around the dams, they pretty much take it from there.
River herring restoration outside of the human scope of things is relatively simple. Put some fish in, wait 4 years, fish come back, okay? So when you add the human element and the politics of it, nobody likes change, I want to keep my dam, where the struggle comes in. These are relatively easy fish to restore.
Once they have a way,
yes, they'll go, yeah.
After the alewives make their way upstream, they get to one final fish ladder.
So like all good stories, we're going to finish where we began.
On the other side of this ladder is their goal, China Lake. where they'll spawn.
This is a gigantic pelican case at the top of the fishway.
At the top of the ladder is a big box with a machine
And there's the counter.
that counts the fish as they come into the lake.
Passive field counter, so it has 2 electric fields, each tube 12 tubes, 3 stainless steel bands. Center band is a signal, the outer bands are field. Okay.
2022 was the first year that fish could swim all the way to China Lake after 200 years. And in that first spring, more than 800,000 fish made the trip, which is a lot. But in 2023, the second year China Lake was open for spawning, Nate and Landis counted almost 2 million fish. Alewives are an unusually resilient species. There's no guarantee that complex ecological systems can just bounce back from centuries of human interference. And outside of Maine, alewives haven't rebounded like this, even elsewhere in New England, in this tiny sliver of their range. Still, watching the ecosystem right itself, it's an unusually hopeful story. We're used to hearing about decline, about habitat loss and species headed for extinction. But all the alewives need is for us to get out of their way.
This simple, infinitely complex, active nature is so reliable and so comforting to know that it still works just the way it was intended. I like seeing the fed loons. I like seeing the fed eagles. I like seeing the alewives getting chased. I like seeing that. There's a beauty there that is beyond sublime. It really is. How do you sell that idea to people?
Well, you must have done it.
Well, you must do it. To undersell it and just simply put in a fishway, you failed. Because you'll be right back. The fish will be plugged up by beaver boards and gunk, and nobody will be paying attention.
The most important piece of habitat restoration isn't the physical removal of dams or building fish ladders. It's convincing people that the habitat is worth fixing, that the fish and the entire food web they support can come back if we give them the chance. The Briny is an independent podcast with original music and sound design by me and additional music by Blue Dot Sessions. The Briny is a proud member of Hub and Spoke, a collective of independent producers making great podcasts out of a love of the medium. If you're a fan of The Briny, check out Out There, a podcast that explores big questions through intimate stories outdoors. They recently launched their new season, and it's all about the theme of silence. You can find out more and hear all the Hub and Spoke podcasts at hubspokeaudio.org.
Hub and Spoke Audio Collective.